Get your little black behind out of my hallway, now. I am sorry, sir. The break room is closed. I am just waiting for my mom. Do I look like I care? You think I did that, so some maid's daughter could sit here doing homework like it is a public library? I will move, sir. I am sorry. You should not be here in the first place. This is a defense technology company, not a daycare. Tell your mother, if I see you out here again, she is gone. He stepped on her open textbook without breaking stride. The sole of his Italian loafer left a black scuff mark across the page. He never looked down. But that young girl he just humiliated, she was not looking at him either. She was looking through the glass wall behind him at a whiteboard covered in drone schematics, and she saw something that 30 engineers with six-figure salaries had missed. What she did next would cost Victor Langford everything. Yeah, that moment right there, they missed something big. Let us get into it. Apex Dynamics had won the biggest contract in its history some time ago. $500 million from the United States Department of Defense. 200 autonomous inspection drones for the United States Navy. Small machines, about the size of a house cat, built to crawl through the tight engine compartments of warships and detect microfractures invisible to the human eye. The kind of contract that turns a company into an empire. Victor Langford had popped champagne the day the Pentagon signed off. He had given interviews, promised shareholders a new era. Now, that new era was on the brink of collapse. 10 prototype drones had been put through a federal pre-inspection. 8 failed. The problems were catastrophic: overheating after a short run, articulated arms locking up mid-cycle, gimbal-mounted cameras losing calibration within minutes, sending back footage so shaky it was worthless. Colonel Nia Torres, the Pentagon's liaison officer, delivered the verdict in person: fix this, or the contract dies. And if it dies, Apex pays a $60 million penalty. Behind closed doors, Langford raged. I did not build this company to have it sunk by engineers who cannot make a tin can crawl straight. Brent Hale, his vice president of engineering, nodded along and said all the right things. Hale was a political animal: expensive suits, firm handshake, mediocre mind. He had built his career not by solving problems, but by making sure they landed on someone else's desk. He blamed the part supplier. He blamed the timeline. He blamed a junior engineer who had already quit. He never once looked at his own decisions. A leaked internal memo hit the press. Lila Ramirez, an investigative reporter at the Houston Chronicle, ran the headline: Apex Dynamics, $500 million drone deal on the brink. Stock dropped sharply in days. Board members started calling emergency sessions. And every evening, while all of this unraveled, a young girl stood in a dim hallway outside the engineering labs, watching through glass walls, filling a composition notebook with observations nobody asked for and nobody knew existed. The first incident happened soon after. Nia was walking back from the restroom when she passed the restricted prototype hangar. The door was propped open. A technician had stepped out for a cigarette, leaving the bay unattended. 10 drones sat on testing benches under bright work lights. One had its lower chassis panel removed, internals exposed like an open rib cage. A small component, a bearing housing cap no bigger than a thimble, had fallen on the concrete floor. Nia bent down, picked it up with 2 fingers, and placed it back on the workbench, gently. The way you would set down a baby bird. That was all she did. A security camera recorded every frame. The next morning, Brent Hale summoned Gloria to his office. Not Nia, her mother, because to Brent Hale, a young black girl was not a person with a name. She was a liability attached to the help. Nia sat in a chair beside her mother. Her feet did not quite reach the floor. Her backpack sat on her lap like a shield. Your daughter was caught on camera handling classified defense equipment, Hale said. He slid a printed screenshot across the desk. His voice was calm, which made it worse. This is a federal defense project, Gloria. She could be charged. Do you understand what that means? Gloria's hands were folded tight in her lap. She is just a young girl, Mr. Hale. She picked up a piece that fell on the floor. That is all she did. I do not care if she was picking up a penny off the sidewalk. That bay contains military-grade prototypes under government contract. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Nia for the first time. Not at her face, through her. The way you look at a stain on a wall. Little girls do not belong near machines, period. Not now, not ever. He slid a written warning across the desk. Sign this and understand something, both of you. If I catch her anywhere near that bay again, you are terminated on the spot, and I will file a police report for both of you. Gloria picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking. Nia watched her mother's signature tremble across the dotted line, each letter smaller than the last, as if Gloria was trying to disappear into the paper. Nia said nothing, but under her backpack, her fingers pressed so hard into her palms that her nails left half-moon marks she would still feel at bedtime. The second incident happened soon after, and this time, Nia did not just watch, she spoke. She was sitting in the photocopy room on the first floor, waiting for Gloria to finish cleaning the executive suite. The room was small, windowless, and smelled like warm toner. Nobody ever came in after hours. But someone had been here recently. A stack of thermal failure reports sat on top of the recycling bin. Pages of test data printed and marked up with aggressive red pen strokes, then discarded. Whoever threw them away had given up on them. Nia did not give up. She pulled the stack out and started reading. The data showed a repeating pattern so consistent it was almost musical. Every single drone overheated at nearly the same interval. The engineering team's handwritten margin notes all pointed to the motor as the heat source. Motor overload, motor inefficiency, motor. But Nia saw something different. The thermal imaging curves did not radiate outward from the motor. The heat built from below, from underneath the motor housing where the bearing assembly sat. It was subtle. You would have to look at all the failure reports side by side to see the pattern, and you would have to understand how friction works in a tight mechanical space to know what it meant. Nia understood. She had understood since she was young. Rebuilding lawnmower engines on a card table in a Chicago kitchen, she wrote 3 lines in her composition notebook. Bearing housing tolerance too tight. Friction builds exponentially after a short run. Fix the seat. Fix the heat. The next morning, before school, she found Ellis Grant in the break room pouring coffee. Grant was Apex's senior lead engineer. Tired eyes, decent man. He was one of the few people in the building who had never looked at Gloria like she was furniture. Nia approached him the way a stray cat approaches an open hand, slowly, ready to bolt. "Excuse me, Mr. Grant?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think the heat problem is not the motor. I think it is the bearing housing. The tolerance looks about 3/1000ths too tight. That is where the friction is building." Grant turned and looked down at this skinny young girl in a faded hoodie and dollar store sneakers, clutching a black and white composition notebook against her chest like it was the most valuable thing she owned, which, in a way, it was. His coffee stopped halfway to his mouth, not because what she said was wrong, because it was right, and because it had come from a child standing in a break room in the morning, saying what his 30-person team had failed to identify. Before he could form a single word, a voice cut across the room like a blade. "Why is the cleaning lady's kid talking to my engineers?" Brent Hale stood in the doorway, tall, annoyed, a paper coffee cup in one hand, contempt in both eyes. "Gloria!" he called down the hall without looking away from Nia. "Come get your daughter now, before I write about another incident." Nia pulled her notebook tighter against her chest and walked past Hale with her head down. She did not run. She did not cry. She walked the way her mother walked, quiet, steady, invisible. But Ellis Grant did not move for a long time after she left. His coffee went cold in his hand because he knew. He knew that girl had just said out loud the thing he had been too afraid to put in a memo. The third incident was the worst. Not because of what was said, because of who had to stand there and absorb it. Langford called a company-wide town hall to address the crisis. The auditorium held hundreds of people. Engineers filled the front rows. Managers took the middle. Administrative staff clustered behind them. Along the back wall, standing in a neat line because there were no chairs left for them, the custodial crew, men and women in gray uniforms, brooms and carts parked in the hallway outside, hands folded, eyes forward, faces arranged into the careful blankness of people who had learned that being seen was dangerous. Nia Townsend stood at the far left end of that line. Nia stood beside her. The top of her head barely reached her mother's shoulder. Langford took the podium like he was mounting a stage, sleeves rolled to the forearm, jaw set. The picture of a CEO in command of a crisis. He talked about sacrifice. He talked about accountability. He talked about how Apex was a family, and every family member needed to carry their weight. Then, his hand swept toward the back wall. And let me be frank with all of you. This company has been carrying dead weight for too long. People who clock in, do the absolute bare minimum, and contribute nothing, zero, to our core mission. Those days are over. If you are not adding measurable value to Apex Dynamics, you are taking up space. And space in this building costs money that I personally invested. Polite laughter from the front rows. A few nervous coughs from the middle. Total silence from the back wall. Nia looked up at her mother's face. She knew that expression the way she knew the inside of an engine. The absolute stillness. The jaw tightened just enough to hold everything in. The eyes fixed on a point above Langford's head, so she would not have to meet anyone's gaze. It was the face of a woman who had perfected the art of being insulted without flinching, who had learned, paycheck by paycheck, year by year, that dignity was something you folded up and put in your pocket until you got home. But Nia saw the cost. She always saw the cost. The way her mother's left hand trembled slightly at her side, the way the tendons in her neck pulled tight like guitar strings, wound one turn past safe. Nia reached over and took her mother's hand, small, brown fingers wrapping around larger brown fingers. Gloria squeezed once, hard, then let go. That night, on the late bus ride home, Gloria pressed her forehead against the cold window and did not speak for a long stretch of road. Nia sat beside her, composition notebook in her lap, sneakers not quite reaching the floor, and made a decision that would change both of their lives. She was done watching through glass walls. What this young girl did next would shake Apex Dynamics to its foundation. It would cost Victor Langford his empire. It would save a $500 million contract, and it would prove something that no one in that building believed, that the sharpest mind on the entire campus had been sitting in the hallway every night, invisible, doing homework on a floor that the CEO could not even be bothered to look down at. But to understand what happened next, you need to know where Nia's gift came from. That story begins with a man named Kelvin Townsend who never got the chance to show the world what he could do. Make sure you are subscribed because this story is just getting started. Kelvin Townsend could diagnose a diesel engine the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. He would press his palm flat against the block, close his eyes, and feel for the thing that did not belong. A knock where there should be silence. A vibration half a beat off rhythm. A heat signature in the wrong place. He never went to college, never had the money, never had the time. He grew up in the Inglewood neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, dropped out of high school at 17 to support his mother, and walked into a diesel repair shop on Halsted Street, asking if anybody needed a pair of hands. They gave him a broom. Within months, the shop owner was handing him wrenches. Within a year, he was the one the other mechanics came to when they could not figure out what was wrong. Kelvin had a gift. Not the kind that gets scholarships or newspaper profiles. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in your fingertips and never makes it onto a resume. He married Gloria when he was young. Nia came soon after. They lived in a two-bedroom apartment where the radiator clanked all winter and the windows did not seal right. But the kitchen table was always covered with engine parts. And Nia grew up thinking that was normal, that every kitchen smelled like diesel and lava soap, that every father came home with grease under his nails and a new story about a machine he had brought back to life. Kelvin used to hold Nia on his lap in the kitchen and let her hand him tools while he worked on small repairs. She was young, handing him socket wrenches in the right order without being told. He would look at Gloria across the table and shake his head slowly. The way you do when something amazes you and scares you at the same time. This girl sees it, he would say. She sees how things fit. Nia was young on the morning the phone rang. A hydraulic lift at the shop had failed. The maintenance logs showed it had not been inspected in years. There was supposed to be a review every so often. There was not. The shop owner had cut corners, saved money, and Kelvin Townsend, who could hear a broken piston ring from across a garage, never heard the crack in the lift column above his head. Gloria did not tell Nia right away. She held it for days, walking around the apartment like a ghost, before she sat her daughter on the bed and explained that Daddy was not coming home. Nia did not cry. Not that day. She walked into the kitchen, climbed onto a chair, and opened her father's toolbox. She touched every tool inside, the ratchet, the calipers, the torque wrench with the tape-wrapped handle. She touched them the way you touch someone's face when you're trying to memorize it. She was young. She did not have words for grief, but she had her hands, and her hands remembered everything her father's hands had taught them. Gloria kept the toolbox. She thought about selling it twice during the worst months, when the electricity got shut off, and dinner was rice and canned beans for nights straight. Both times, she opened the lid, saw Nia's face watching her, and closed it again. Inside that lid, taped to the metal with a strip of packing tape, was a note Kelvin had written on a scrap of receipt paper. Gloria did not know when he had written it or why. Maybe it was a reminder to himself. Maybe he somehow knew someone would need to read it later. It said, "The machine does not care who you are. It only cares if you are right." Nia could not read it when she was young, but Gloria read it to her and kept reading it. Every time a kid at school said she was weird for taking apart a calculator instead of playing at recess. Every time a teacher told her to stop drawing gears in her notebook margins. Every time the world told her she was wrong for being exactly what she was. By the time she was older, Nia took apart a mechanical alarm clock and reassembled it in the middle of the night on the kitchen floor. Gloria found her surrounded by tiny gears and springs, the clock ticking perfectly. She fixed a neighbor's broken washing machine after watching one repair video. She rebuilt lawnmower engines for families on the block. She built a robotic arm from scrap servos and salvaged electronics that could pick up an egg without cracking the shell. At 13, she sat in the dim hallway of a defense technology company every night watching machines through glass walls, understanding them better than the people paid six figures to build them. She never told anyone what she could do. She never bragged. She never asked to be tested or measured or recognized. She just watched and learned and wrote it all down in a composition notebook that smelled like floor cleaner and recycled paper. And on the inside lid of her father's toolbox, in handwriting, she had traced over with a Sharpie so it would never fade. Those same 10 words waited for the day they would matter most. The machine does not care who you are. It only cares if you are right. Sometime before the deadline, with failed repair attempts and engineers out of ideas, Colonel Maya Torres had arrived at Apex for what she made clear was her final visit. If the next test failed, the contract was dead, and the penalty clock would start ticking. That was the state of things on the night Nia made her move. Gloria was cleaning the executive suites. Nia told her she needed the restroom. She did not go to the restroom. She walked straight to the prototype hangar. The door was unlocked. A technician had forgotten to badge it shut. The security camera in the corner blinked its red light. Nia saw it. She did not care anymore. The bay was silent, except for the hum of fluorescents and the faint ticking of cooling metal. 10 drones sat on testing benches in a neat row, like patients waiting for a diagnosis nobody could give. Nia did not touch a single one. She could not risk that. Not after the written warning. Not with her mother's job hanging by a thread. But she did not need to touch them. She just needed to look. She moved along the row, slowly using the flashlight on her mother's old phone. She studied the exposed internals of the open chassis drone, traced the cable routing with her eyes, noted the orientation of the rubber dampening mounts, counted the wiring paths, and saw where motor power cables ran alongside sensor data lines with nothing between them. That was all she needed. She sat on the concrete floor with her back against a supply cabinet and wrote pages in her composition notebook, fast in pencil, diagrams with arrows, measurements estimated by eye, technical terms spelled perfectly in the looping handwriting of a young girl. 3 problems, 3 causes, 3 fixes, all on lined paper torn from a school notebook. The next morning, Nia did not go to school. She caught the early bus to Apex and arrived at the front lobby a full hour before the engineering shift. The receptionist saw a skinny black girl in a faded hoodie and worn sneakers. Nia placed 3 folded pages on the desk. "Can you please give these to Mr. Ellis Grant? It is about the drone project." The receptionist almost smiled, but something in the child's voice stopped her. No nervousness, no fidgeting, just a quiet certainty that did not match the hoodie or the age. "He will understand," Nia said. "Please, just make sure he gets it." Grant found the pages soon after. He read them twice without blinking. The bearing housing tolerance was off. The vibration dampening mounts were installed wrong. The motor cables and sensor cables were routed side by side with no shielding, creating electromagnetic interference. 3 problems. Clear logical sequence. Proposed solutions written in a child's handwriting. He thought about bringing it to Hale for about a second. Hale would bury it. Hale would bury him, and the drones would keep failing, and hundreds of people would lose their jobs, so one man could protect his ego. Grant picked up his phone and dialed a Washington, D.C. number he had only used once before. Dr. Lena Harper answered on the second ring. 63 years old, decades at NASA, lead engineer on major missions, patents. She sat on Apex's technical advisory board because she believed companies building machines that mattered should be held accountable. She was also Black, daughter of Alabama sharecroppers. She had walked into MIT at 16, carrying everything she owned in one suitcase. She knew exactly what it felt like to be the person nobody expected. Grant told her everything. Harper listened without interrupting. She asked him to photograph the pages and send them immediately. She studied them for some time. Then, she called back and said 4 words. "I am on the next flight." That evening, Harper called Victor Langford and invoked her advisory board authority to bring in an outside diagnostic consultant for an emergency assessment. Langford did not hesitate. He was desperate. "Whoever you have got, bring them. I do not care if it is the Pope." Harper arranged a live diagnostic session in the hangar. Full attendance. Engineering team. Hale, Colonel Torres, Langford. The next morning. She did not mention Nia's name. She did not mention Nia's age. She said nothing about a composition notebook, or a faded hoodie, or a pair of worn sneakers. At the start of the session, the doors of the hangar opened and Nia Townsend walked in. Jeans, clean hoodie, school backpack over one shoulder. In her right hand, her father's toolbox. It was almost too heavy for her arm. She had to lean slightly to keep her balance. 30 engineers stared. Brent Hale laughed out loud. Langford's mouth opened and closed without sound. Colonel Torres looked at Harper with half alarm and half disbelief. "Dr. Harper, this is minor." "I am aware, Colonel. I am also aware that your deadline is approaching and your team has no answers." "She does. I reviewed her analysis personally, and I take full responsibility." Torres studied Harper's face. Decades of experience, major missions, patents, a reputation that had never once been wrong about a machine. The colonel nodded. Harper turned to the room. This is my consultant. She has a diagnosis. I suggest you listen. Nia set her father's toolbox on the workbench. The metal lid clanged against steel, and for a moment that was the only sound in the hangar. 30 adults, most of them twice her height and 3 times her age, standing in silence, watching a young girl who weighed less than the toolbox she had just set down. She opened the lid. The tools gleamed, and on the underside, in Sharpie traced over a child's handwriting, 10 words caught the overhead light. The machine does not care who you are. It only cares if you are right. Nia took a breath, looked up at a room full of people who did not believe in her, and began. The drones are not overheating because of the motors. That was the first thing Nia said. Not an introduction, not a thank you, not a nervous preamble, just a statement delivered in a voice that was steady and clear and about 2 octaves higher than anyone in that room expected technical authority to sound like. Brent Hale crossed his arms and smirked. 2 engineers in the back row exchanged glances. Langford stood near the wall with his hands in his pockets, watching the way a man watches a car wreck he has already decided is not his problem. Nia did not look at any of them. She looked at the drone. Your engineering reports all blame the motor for the thermal failure, she said. Every margin note, every test summary, every red ink comment I found in the recycling bin points to motor overload, but the motor is not the problem. The bearing housing is. She turned to Grant. Can you open the lower chassis panel, please? Grant hesitated for half a second. Then he picked up a driver and removed 4 screws. The panel came off, exposing the compact motor assembly and the bearing seat beneath it. Nia reached into her father's toolbox and pulled out a micrometer. The instrument looked almost comically large in her small hand, but her fingers found the adjustment wheel with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She placed the micrometer on the bearing seat and took the measurement. Then she read the number out loud. She opened her composition notebook to a page near the middle where she had copied the original manufacturer's specification from a discarded printout. She held the notebook up so the room could see her handwriting. The design spec calls for a different measurement. That is a 3/1000ths difference. 3/1000ths of an inch does not sound like much, but in a bearing seat this size at the RPM this motor runs that 3/1000ths creates a friction coefficient that doubles every short run of operation. By a short time, the heat buildup exceeds the thermal threshold of the housing material. That is not a motor problem. That is a tolerance problem, and it is in every single drone on this bench. She reached into her backpack, unzipped the front pocket, and pulled out a small machined part wrapped in a paper towel. A bearing housing she had made herself at a community makerspace, one of the free maker programs. She unwrapped it and set it on the bench. This one is machined to the correct tolerance. Swap it in and run the drone for a short test. Grant looked at Harper. Harper nodded. He installed the replacement part. It took less than minutes. He powered up the drone. A short time. No heat spike. Longer. The thermal readout held steady. Even longer. The motor hummed at operating temperature, clean and even, the way it was supposed to sound from the beginning. The room was quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for a meeting to end. The stunned quiet of people watching something they could not explain. Brent Hale shifted his weight. One bearing does not prove anything. We are dealing with multiple system failures here, not just a heat issue. Nia nodded. She actually nodded as if she had expected him to say exactly that. You are right, she said. There are 3 problems. That was the first one. The second one is why your cameras do not work. She moved to the gimbal assembly, mounted on top of the drone's chassis. The camera housing sat on 4 small rubber isolation mounts, designed to absorb vibration during movement. Standard components, nothing exotic. These vibration-dampening mounts are installed wrong, Nia said. Not broken, not defective, just wrong. She pointed to the rubber pads. These isolators have a grain direction. Most people do not know that, because most people do not work with rubber at the component level, but rubber is like wood. It has a grain. If you mount it with the grain, it absorbs vibration the way it is supposed to. If you mount it against the grain, it amplifies vibration instead of dampening it. She picked up one of the mounts and rotated it in her fingers. Every mount on every drone in this room is installed off. The grain is fighting the vibration instead of absorbing it. That is why your gimbal loses calibration. The camera is not failing, it is being shaken apart from the inside. She looked at Grant again. Rotate all 4 mounts and run the camera feed. Grant did it. 4 mounts, rotation each, less than a minute of work. He activated the gimbal camera and started a crawl simulation on the test rig. The monitor mounted on the wall above the bench flickered to life. The image was stable, perfectly, impossibly stable. For the first time in months of testing, the camera held calibration through an entire cycle without a single flutter. A murmur went through the room, low, involuntary, the sound of 30 people recalculating everything they thought they knew. One of the junior engineers, a young woman in the second row, whispered to the person next to her, "We suggested checking the mounts some time ago. Hale told us it was a software issue." The whisper was not quiet enough. Several heads turned. Brent Hale's neck went red above his collar. Colonel Torres, who had been standing with her arms crossed and her face unreadable since Nia walked in, leaned forward slightly and uncrossed her arms. She did not speak, but she was listening now with a different kind of attention, the kind that comes with rank and consequence. Nia was already moving to the 3rd drone on the bench, the one with the articulated inspection arm that had been locking up during every test cycle. "The arm locks up at approximately the same interval," Nia said. "Your team thinks it is a software timing conflict between the motor driver and the sensor feedback loop. They are half right. There is a timing conflict, but the software is not causing it. The hardware is." She asked Grant to open the wiring bay on the underside of the drone. He did. A dense tangle of color-coded cables filled the narrow channel. Nia pointed with her index finger, tracing 2 cable paths that ran parallel through the bay, pressed against each other with no separation and no shielding. "That red bundle is the motor power cable. High current, strong electromagnetic field, and right next to it, touching it, is the white cable. That is your sensor data line, low voltage, very sensitive to interference." She looked up at the room. Every time the motor draws current, it generates an electromagnetic pulse that bleeds into the sensor cable. The feedback signal gets corrupted. The arm's control system receives bad data and does what any good control system does when it gets bad data. It stops moving. It locks up. Not because it is broken, because it is being told to stop by a signal that should not be there. She reached into her backpack one more time and pulled out 2 small items: a ferrite choke, a simple cylindrical clip that costs little at any electronics store, and a short cable extension. Clip this ferrite choke onto the sensor cable to filter the interference. Then, reroute the motor cable using this extension to create separation from the data line. Separation is enough to drop the electromagnetic bleed below the noise threshold. Grant installed both. The ferrite choke clipped on with a soft click. The cable reroute took seconds. He powered up the articulated arm and started the test cycle. A short time. The arm moved through its programmed positions, smooth, precise. Longer, no hesitation, even longer. The arm kept moving, flexing, extending, retracting without a single stutter. Grant stepped back from the bench. He did not sit down because there was nowhere to sit. He just stood there, hands at his sides, and said what everyone in the room was already thinking. "She is right. About all of it." The room broke open. Engineers started talking over each other. 2 of them were pulling up schematics on their laptops to verify the cable routing. A third was on his phone calling the part supplier about bearing specifications. Colonel Torres was smiling. Not a big smile, a small controlled one. The kind that means someone has just made a decision. Dr. Harper stood near the back of the room with her arms folded. She had not said a word since introducing Nia. Now she spoke, and her voice cut through the noise like a bell. The machine does not lie. Every head turned, then turned back to Nia. And then Brent Hale did the only thing Brent Hale knew how to do when the ground was disappearing under his feet. He attacked. He stood up from his leaning position against the wall and pointed at Nia the way you point at something you want removed. This is absurd. She is a child, a young girl with no credentials, no clearance, no engineering degree, and no legal authority to be anywhere near classified defense equipment. I do not care if she guessed right about a bearing. This is a federal contract governed by security protocols, and what is happening in this room right now is a violation of multiple of them. He turned to Langford, looking for the lifeline he had always found there. Victor, are we really going to let the future of this company rest on the word of a cleaning lady's daughter? The words hung in the air like smoke. Cleaning lady's daughter, said in front of 30 people, in front of a Pentagon colonel, in front of the child herself. Nia did not flinch. She did not look at Hale. She looked at her father's toolbox open on the bench beside her, the Sharpie words glowing under the fluorescent light. She did not need to defend herself. The machine had already done that. Nah, because cleaning lady's daughter is crazy. He really said that out loud. In front of everyone. And this kid just stood there. Did not even blink. Me? I would have lost it. But that is why I'm telling this story. Because Nia did something way harder than clapping back. She proved him wrong. The silence after Hale's outburst lasted seconds. Then, Victor Langford stepped forward. He did not look at Hale. He did not look at Harper. He looked directly at Nia, the way a man looks at something he is about to crush between his fingers. Fine, he said. A child genius. How charming. You found 3 problems on 1 drone. Congratulations. But this is not a science fair project, sweetheart. This is a $500 million federal contract. 10 drones. All 10 need to pass a full inspection cycle under military testing standards. He straightened his cuffs. So here is what is going to happen. You fix all 10, every single one. If they pass Colonel Torres's inspection, I will stand in front of this room and admit I was wrong. But if even one fails, even one, your mother is terminated. Today. No severance, no notice, and neither of you will set foot in this building again. He said it the way a man says something when he is certain the other person will break. When the threat is so heavy and so personal that no reasonable person would accept it. Nia looked across the room. Gloria was standing in the doorway. Harper had brought her down. She still had her cleaning gloves tucked into her apron pocket. Her face was tight with fear. The kind of fear that lives in the stomach and climbs into the chest and makes it hard to breathe. Because this was not about drones or contracts or engineering. This was about rent, groceries, the electric bill, the bus pass. Everything. Nia looked at her mother. Gloria looked back, and then Gloria nodded. One small dip of the chin. The kind of nod that does not mean I am sure. It means I trust you. Nia turned back to Langford. I will need access to the hangar, Mr. Grant's help, and a box of ferrite chokes. She paused. And I will need my mom to bring me dinner because I cannot drive. A single laugh broke the tension. Then another. Not mocking laughter. The surprised, involuntary kind that escapes when something real punctures something artificial. Because in that moment, standing in a room full of executives and engineers and military officers, Nia Townsend was exactly what she was. A young girl who needed a ride and a packed lunch. Harper stepped in with conditions. Nia would work supervised with Grant, present at all times, reasonable hours, no overnight sessions. She was a minor, and Harper would not allow that to be forgotten, even if Langford already had. Nia worked through the weekend, 2 full days. The hangar became her operating room. Grant was her hands when the bolts were too tight for a young girl's grip. Two junior engineers, the same ones Hale had shut down some time ago, showed up without being asked and stayed until the lights went off. The rhythm was steady and almost musical. Nia diagnosed. Grant executed. She pointed. He turned the wrench. She measured. He swapped the part. Her voice was calm and constant, calling out tolerances and orientations and cable paths with the precision of someone reading from a manual that existed only inside her head. Gloria brought dinner both nights, rice and chicken, in a plastic container, still warm. She sat on a stool by the door and watched her daughter command a room of grown men without raising her voice once. She did not understand the technical language, but she understood the silence that followed every time Nia spoke. The kind of silence that means people are listening. The morning of the final test, the hangar was standing room only. Colonel Torres and two DOD inspectors stood at the front with clipboards and tablets. Behind them, Langford, Hale, the board members, Harper, Grant, and the full engineering team. Lila Ramirez had gotten word of something unusual happening at Apex and was waiting in the lobby. 10 drones sat on this testing rail, loaded into a mock ship engine compartment built to military specifications. Colonel Torres gave the signal. Drone 1 activated. It crawled into the compartment. Camera stable. Arms articulating. Thermal readout flat. A short time. Longer. Even longer. It completed the full cycle and returned to its starting position. Drone 2, same result. Drone 3. Drone 4. By Drone 5, nobody was breathing normally. Drone 6 entered the compartment, and the articulated arm hesitated. A half-second pause. The room went rigid. Nia leaned forward from her position near the wall, her fingers pressing into her palms. The arm corrected itself and resumed its cycle. Full cycle complete. Drone 8, 9. Drone 10 entered the compartment and completed its cycle. Full inspection. 0 failures, 0 anomalies. Colonel Torres removed her reading glasses, set down her clipboard, and addressed the room. Apex Dynamics has met all contract specifications. The $500 million program will proceed as scheduled. The room erupted. Engineers shouted. Someone clapped. Grant turned to Nia and extended his hand. She shook it, her small fingers disappearing inside his palm. Gloria was at the doorway, both hands pressed over her mouth, tears running down her face and into the creases of a smile she had not worn in years. Dr. Harper walked to Nia. She put a hand on the girl's shoulder and leaned down. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly, "and he would tell you the machine knew." Nia nodded. She hugged her mother. Then she turned around, walked back to the workbench, and started putting tools back in her father's toolbox, one by one, each in its place, because that was what Kelvin Townsend had taught her before he taught her anything else. You finish the job, then you clean up. A young girl, putting away wrenches while a room full of adults stood around her, trying to understand what had just happened. Victor Langford did not applaud. He did not speak. He stood against the far wall with his hands in his pockets and an expression on his face that was not defeat and was not admiration. It was a calculation. The look of a man measuring how much damage had just been done to the only thing he actually cared about, himself. The engineers were still buzzing when Dr. Harper guided Nia and Gloria into a small conference room off the main hallway. She closed the door softly behind them. The noise from the hangar faded to a muffle. Harper sat across from them. She did not look at Nia first. She looked at Gloria. Because Nia was young, and anything that happened next required a mother's ears before a daughter's hope. "Mrs. Townsend, your daughter just did something that most engineers with years of experience could not do. I have sat on review boards for decades. I have evaluated PhDs from top institutions. And I am telling you, sitting here, that what Nia has cannot be taught. It cannot be trained into someone. It is there, or it is not. And in her, it is." Gloria's hands were folded tight on the table. Her cleaning gloves were still tucked in her apron. Harper laid out the offer: a full scholarship to a university pre-college STEM program for exceptionally gifted students. Nia would take university-level engineering courses while finishing high school. Harper would mentor her personally, one session every week, by video or in person. Harper had already contacted a foundation that supports single parents of gifted children, a fund that would supplement Gloria's income so she could reduce her hours and be home when her daughter needed her. "This is not charity," Harper said. "This is an investment in someone who has already proven her value." Before they could respond, a knock came at the door. Colonel Torres stepped in, still carrying her clipboard. She addressed Gloria directly, not Nia. Proper protocol when speaking about a minor's future. "Mrs. Townsend, the United States Navy operates a STEM scholarship program for students with exceptional technical aptitude. When your daughter is ready for college, I would like her to apply." She placed a sealed envelope on the table. "My direct contact information is inside. Do not lose it." Nia looked at her mother. Gloria was crying, but she was smiling too. The kind of expression where the face cannot decide which emotion gets to go first. "Mom," Nia said, "does this mean I do not have to sit in the break room anymore?" Gloria pulled her daughter into a hug so tight that Nia's sneakers lifted off the floor. "Baby, I think you are coming back to this building, but not to do homework in a plastic chair." The first domino fell within days. Colonel Torres's official report to the Department of Defense did not just confirm that the drones passed inspection. It asked a question, a pointed, uncomfortable question. How does a $500 million defense program nearly collapse because of 3 basic engineering errors that a young girl identified in a short time? The Pentagon ordered an internal audit of Apex Dynamics. Not a courtesy review, a full forensic audit with federal oversight. The auditors found Brent Hale's fingerprints on everything. Sometime earlier, junior engineers had flagged concerns about the bearing tolerances during an internal quality review. They had written a memo. Hale had killed it. Not because the data was wrong, because fixing the tolerances would have delayed the production timeline, and a delay would have pushed Hale past the quarterly benchmark that triggered his performance bonus. A large bonus. He chose the money. He buried the memo. He signed off on the flawed specs and told his team to move forward. But that was not the worst of it. The auditors also discovered that Hale had submitted progress reports to the Department of Defense that contained fabricated testing data, tests that were never run, results that were never recorded, numbers that existed only in Hale's imagination and on official government documents bearing his signature. Falsifying reports on a federal defense contract violates the False Claims Act. It is not a corporate misstep. It is not a fireable offense that ends with a severance package and a quiet exit. It is a federal crime. Brent Hale was terminated soon after. Security escorted him from the building with a cardboard box and an expression that looked like a man watching his own house burn from across the street. His engineering license was suspended pending review, and his file was referred to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. He was not destroyed by Nia Townsend. He was destroyed by his own signature on documents he never should have signed. Nia simply built the light that made the shadows visible. The second domino took a little longer, but it fell harder. Lila Ramirez had been chasing the Apex story for some time. When word leaked about what had happened in the hangar, she knew she had something bigger than a corporate crisis. She had a story that would burn. Her article ran under a headline that spread across social media like brushfire: "The young girl who saved a $500 million contract." It was detailed. It was sourced. Anonymous engineers confirmed the toxic culture. They described a company where questions were punished, where junior voices were silenced, where the custodial staff were treated as invisible furniture. One source provided a detail that Ramirez almost did not believe until a second source confirmed it independently. Victor Langford had stepped on a child's textbook. That detail became the image that defined the story. A grown man's Italian loafer pressing a dirty footprint onto a page of a young girl's math book. It was not the biggest thing Langford had done wrong, but it was the thing people could not stop talking about, because it was small and cruel and perfectly symbolic of everything the story was about. The hashtag started hours after the article went live. Within days, it was everywhere. Apex's board of directors convened an emergency session. The vote was unanimous. Victor Langford was asked to resign as CEO effective immediately. He retained his stock, but lost his title, his office, his authority, and the reputation he had spent decades building. The new board chair issued a public statement, an apology to the custodial staff, a commitment to cultural reform, and the launch of an initiative called Open Innovation, a program allowing any employee, any contractor, any family member of any employee to submit technical observations through a formal channel. The man who told a young girl that his building was not a daycare was now the one being escorted out of it. The man who stepped on her book was now the one watching his legacy crumble underfoot. He did not get to say goodbye from the podium. He did not get a town hall. He got a side door and a car waiting in the parking garage, the same loading dock where Nia Townsend had clocked in every night for years. Sometime later, Nia Townsend sat in an engineering lab at a university, calibrating a drone prototype she had designed herself. She was older, top of her class, first-place winner at a state robotics championship. Gloria no longer cleaned offices at late hours. She worked the front desk at Apex Dynamics. New management offered her the position the same week Langford walked out the side door. On the lab bench, beside Nia's prototype, sat a battered toolbox, lid open. Sharpie on the inside traced over the handwriting of a young girl. The machine does not care who you are. It only cares if you are right. Some people build walls to keep others out. Nia Townsend built machines that broke them down. Yo, honestly, this one got me. Like, we really out here stepping on kids' books and telling them they do not belong? Nah. Nia was the smartest person in that whole building, and nobody even looked at her. That is not her problem. That is ours. Do not sleep on people just because they do not look the part. Now, here is my question. If you were Nia, holding your dead father's toolbox, your mom's job on the line, 30 adults staring you down like you do not belong, would you have spoken up or walked away? Tell me in the comments. And if you watched close, go back to when Langford stepped on that textbook, the chapter on tolerances and measurement, the same subject that saved his company. Rewatch it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe. We do this every week. Next story might be yours.